Welcome to the first episode of the Breaking Bias podcast, a motorsports tech podcast where the only bias we have about motorsports is that we like really cool tech. I'm Molly, your co-host, and I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Obbs. How are you? Hello. Welcome to our new home.
I'm doing great, Molly. I'm so excited about the Breaking Bias podcast. We're going to really be demystifying motorsports tech across all the motorsport platforms. I'm super excited. Our first episode.
Yay! We are kicking
awesome.
things off with a bang. I think we have a lot of really fun tech topics to talk about that we're going to get into, and I think we wanted to kind of welcome the listeners and explain what we're about and what we plan to do here over on Breaking Bias. I don't know if you want to kick that off, and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, so, we have a really specific mission and vision for what we want to do with Breaking Bias. I think it's by no accident that the podcast is called Breaking Bias because for us, like you said, the only bias that we have really is really cool motorsport tech. But aside from that, we don't get hung up on all these team biases and all these different motorsport platform biases, Formula One, IndyCar, WEC. We love it all. We love all the motorsports.
NASCAR, so we really can't forget either.
Yes, NASCAR, absolutely. We want to break down all those biases. And also, you are a kick A female. I don't know if I can curse on this podcast, but you are.
We'll put the explicit tag. We'll put it in there. Go for it.
Okay. You are a kick-ass female, Molly, in the motorsport tech world, and there are not a whole lot of those. So we are definitely breaking some gender biases with this podcast as well. That's really our mission. Our vision is to be just inclusive in all, motorsport categories, genders, backgrounds. You don't have to be an engineer to understand tech either, do you?
Yes, exactly. No, and that's my mission too with my pages as well, is you shouldn't need an engineering background or science background to understand race cars. Like if you want to understand why a car looks like that, what the heck's going on or what they're talking about, you should be able to understand that. So I think Breaking Bias is going to be a great home for all of that on top of both of our platforms too, between Twitter, TikTok, and all of that good stuff too. So I think the plan is we'll just kind of hang out, talk motorsports tech. We'll obviously have some guests coming in and out. So some episodes may have guests, some may not. It'll just be Obbs and I here. And like Dr. Obbs said, we hold no bias to motorsports categories. So we will talk about everything from Formula One to WEC to IndyCar to NASCAR, everything in between too. So I'm really excited to kind of get things kicked off and get going.
That's right. So I think getting us going in our first episode, we are days away from the summer season of F1 being over and us being back into racing. So we're going to start with F1, and we have to talk about Zandvoort that's coming up in a couple of days.
I think so too.
But it is midway through the season, Molly, and we've had a lot of really cool tech stuff that's happened up until this point. What are some things maybe that have caught your eye?
I think some of the biggest wows, at least like to me, I have to start with Aston Martin, obviously, where they started the year with a bang and kind of seemed to have tapered off. And that was a point that I had made in other spaces was, are they going to be able to keep up that momentum? I think there's also been some wows for me from McLaren. I think we were planning to talk about that anyway. And then the quick pivot from Mercedes with the high pod, the wide pod, the 0.5 pod. And I think the floor, finally seeing some floors that were kind of mystic to us with especially the Monaco. Red Bull. Yes, Monaco and the flying floors. So I think those are like my top four so far. What has kind of stuck out to you wow-wise? Or like, I liked it, someone called it like roses or thorns with tech. So like what's stuck out to you so far?
Those are definitely some things that I noticed as well. I mean, like you said, the floors, the biggest thing that jumped out to me was everyone really getting to see sort of the intricacies that there were in the Red Bull floor, maybe compared to some of the, the McLaren and the Ferrari floors and things like that. And the other thing was just seeing the sort of growth of the Mercedes during the course of the year, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how many different side pods they've had this year. Maybe, I think it's been 3, right?
Yeah, so 3, 4, and the season's not over.
Yeah, I think No, and there's still time for more side
Yes,
pods.
there is. There's
But
plenty.
yeah, it looks like this latest version seems to have given them a step. But you mentioned
Hmm.
McLaren, and for me, I think performance step wise, that was probably the biggest one that I
Yeah,
noticed was just the
I
jump
agree.
that they made. Yeah, it was
Hmm.
really impressive. I mean, I don't know, I was kind of studying the McLaren upgrade to understand a bit more about it. And there's definitely some things that we could see with our eyes as far as little, detailing and things they've done
Yeah,
with the side pods and the water slides or the gullies, whatever you want to call them. But I think a lot of it's been done underneath the car. We probably
I
can't
do
see.
too. I really do too. And I think Blake, friend of the pod, Break, for anybody that knows him,
Yes, break.
he had a really good video out that actually like he dove into the data. And there's like, I think he said it was like a 1.5% increase or something. Like he's actually delved into the numbers behind it in the telemetry too. And it's absolutely fascinating. And I think we know, I agree with it being on the underside of the car for sure. I mean, we know that McLaren, at least last season and at least the start of this season, was they've had a terrible drag to downforce ratio. So that means the car is
Yeah,
not efficient at all. So while
that's
they
right.
may have had a higher downforce car, which is great for the ground effect and great for production of downforce, maintaining that and having a fast car that way, they had a lot of drag, which is bad.
Hmm.
So that means it's inefficient. And that's really, not only is it like a power to weight ratio thing with like your powertrain, but it's also your drag to downforce. How efficient are you producing downforce and how low drag are you? And that's, I think, something that
That's right.
I've noticed is that car is really inefficient in that area. And I've said that multiple other places. And then on top of that, the car is really weak in the front end. It has been, that's
Mm.
kind of like the key trait that we've heard talked about for a really long time. And there's some stuff that drivers can do to help, but it doesn't get you speed because you're still really inefficient. So
Yeah.
I think that whatever they've done, they've obviously been able to keep the high downforce and reduce the drag. So I think there's been a lot of work underneath, but I think all of the stuff that we can see is playing into improving that ratio and making sure that it's now more balanced, or you have more downforce than you do drag. So it's kind of helping them have that speed, because we know the Mercedes power units are fast. We know that they're reliable. They're not like the
Mm.
weakest one in the field out of the five. And so I think not only with what we can see, but I think what we can't see has really played into maintaining the downforce level while reducing the overall drag that they're producing. I think that that's played into their resurgence all of a sudden, this huge upgrade package that they brought. And I think they've also obviously dealt with some of this front end weakness. It looks a lot more, I would say, I don't want to say reliant. It looks a lot better to turn. It looks like it wants to turn a little bit more. It's not as
Yeah.
weak on entry and kind of mid corner where we would see it in the past.
Yeah, they've certainly done a lot of work, I would say, especially in the high speed corners from some of the data
Hmm.
that I've looked at. I mean, they were very impressive in Silverstone at the British Grand
Yeah.
Prix in the high speed corners. Actually better performance wise than the RB19, which to me was really
Hmm.
surprising. Um,
Yeah.
but I think you mentioned kind of the weak front end. One of the things that I'm curious to see if they can get their heads around during the year is some of the tire degradation issues that they've had.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is related maybe to the weakness of the front end, maybe a bit of sliding that might be there that's
Hmm.
causing them to wear out their tires a bit faster, but they certainly need to get their heads around that.
Yeah, and it seems like, going
Yeah.
off of getting their heads around stuff, it seems like they were shocked by their speed too. Like they seem to kind of show up and go,
Yeah.
"Holy crap!" I mean, we said we could swear on this podcast, but like they kind of had no shit moment. Like we're fast, and oh shit, and it seems like
Yeah.
they weren't expecting that performance, and so I think also getting their head around that and figuring out, well, what did we do in the setup that this really worked, getting that back to the models and making sure that they continue to iterate on that and their setup sheets and all of their different setups and models and simulations to make sure that they actually are truly understanding the performance and the dynamics of this new system that they've built. It seems like they also need to kind of continue to work on that as well.
Yeah.
I think the tire thing as well. I think a lot of teams are
Yeah.
probably in that boat with the stiffer sidewall too now that Pirelli has brought for the rest of the season.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, Pirelli has mentioned, they brought the new tires to the British Grand Prix. They had mentioned that they're stronger. Teams have a lot more downforce, which is a testament to the teams because they really tried to remove downforce this year by raising the floor edge to try to make it a little bit less, peaky in the downforce on the aero map. But it seems like teams have found a way around that. And
Yes. If
it's,
there's a
and
will, there's a way in racing.
yeah, absolutely. They will find a way. And they've had to strengthen the sidewall. And these were tires they were supposed to roll out, I think, next year that they brought
Yes.
ahead, right?
Yeah, they were supposed to be for next year, and they wound up pulling them ahead for, I think they cited safety concerns with the loading
Yeah,
that was going into the current sidewall tire. So they're still kind
that's
of
right.
these big, cushy 18-inch combination here, but now they've stiffened up that kind of nice squishy sprung mass at the end of
Hmm.
the suspension
Hmm.
and the end of the axle. So I think understanding that's going to be key as well to
Yeah,
not only their momentum, but I think the rest of the field as well, and how it affects their setup windows and their car and their DEG and all of that as we go track to track, and they kind of get to finally see the
absolutely.
full. I don't think we've seen the full like range yet of all six of that new sidewall.
No, we haven't. And it's, speaking of getting your heads around how the tire is going to perform, one of the teams that's been complaining about the new tires and how it's affected their performance has been Aston Martin. We talked about
Yeah.
that, a bit, kind of their performance really from the start of the year to now. They've gone backwards, which is quite surprising.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the
Yes.
Canada update that they said maybe,
Mm-hmm.
didn't quite work or took them a step backwards. So I'm curious to
Yeah.
see if they're able to do anything with that. I think in Zandvoort they said they're going to have a
Yeah.
few upgrades, maybe try to claw that
Mm-hmm.
back.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited to see what they bring to Zandvoort because they brought this upgrade package to Canada, and it seemed like they were very puzzled by the fact that it didn't work as intended, and they fell back pretty heavily. And it seemed like in the races following, they were trying different combinations of things and trying to make it work and trying to see what they could do to make that car as fast as it was, and they still didn't get much success leading up to the summer break. It kind of almost reminds me of like Ferrari and Mercedes last season, where they were trying like every combination of things they could. They were kind of going through these really wide setup windows. It seemed like they were trying a lot of stuff in the practice sessions as well before they would get to Parc Fermé. I have no idea what was going on back at the factory, but I'm sure that there
Hmm.
was a lot of late night sim sessions, a lot of sim sessions going on, a lot of analysis work happening too to try and figure that out. So I'm really, really curious to see what the upgrade package is going to look like, to see what they either swap out and what they bring or what they keep from the Canada update, or if they kind of roll back completely to that faster package and see where that goes. It's obvious that they're bringing a combination of something, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what that was because that was a exceptional car at the start of the season.
It really was, and it's hard to say. Has Aston Martin gone backwards, or have the other teams just advanced faster? It's
Yeah,
That's one of the hardest things I think in Formula One
it
is to really
is.
understand at which pace everybody's really truly moving.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but Mercedes, Mercedes had the big package they just rolled out recently. I'm forgetting exactly where they was it. Uh, where did they
There's been
roll
so
out
many.
the latest one? Was it the British Grand Prix?
I was gonna
I
say
can't.
Silverstone. I
Yeah,
think it was Silverstone. I mean, they've had so many freaking upgrades on that car at so many
so
races, and we've
many.
been hearing about this expected upgrade package. I do think it was Silverstone, though, that the wide pod made its debut. That sounds about right. Somebody can gladly tell us in our comments or tweet at us afterward if we were
Yeah.
wrong, but I think it was
I,
Silverstone because that's what I was going to say as well.
I'm sure somebody will let us know if we are
Yeah.
incorrect. And our same
Yes.
Twitter is really great at that.
Will not let us
So
forget if we're wrong
no,
either.
they
Pretty sure it's Silverstone. I'll fact start talking about the upgrade. I'll fact check us right
yeah,
now while you kick us
yeah.
off on talking about some of the Mercedes
Okay.
stuff.
Yeah, the Mercedes for me was a really interesting one because for the longest time, really, I think I've been saying, and I think Molly, you've been on the record as well, and others about, the lack of a side pod, and how is this really
Mm-hmm.
truly managing some of the drag that you're going to have on the rear tire and things like that aerodynamically. And so what have they done? They've now beefed up the front undercut, added a side pod,
Mm-hmm.
which allows some front pressurization, which also helps to kind of manage the front tire wake. But then also at the rear of the car, they added this nice little scallop in the back part of the downwashing side pod, which they also have now, that is also doing a bit of pressurization, which I thought was really interesting. So for all the aero nerds
Mm-hmm.
that are listening right now, you may know what I'm talking about. But when you allow that pressurization to develop, you also help to essentially create like almost like a it's almost like a pressure wall that helps keep things
Mm-hmm.
away from the rear of the car. And so they may be able to kind of keep some of that trash, some of that dirty wash from the front tire or from other parts of the car, especially in yaw, away from the rear corner and the rear end, the beam wings, over the top of the diffuser, all those things. So I think Mercedes is definitely taking a step in the right direction with this upgrade for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Was it Monaco? I think it was Monaco, actually.
I think Monaco is when they came out with the first downwashing kind of side
Yes.
pod
Yep.
concept, and maybe it was
Then
then the British Grand Prix where they did the whole rest of the scalloping and
I think
tuning
so.
and stuff
Yeah,
with the
that's
side pod.
because I
Yeah,
see the first iteration of it, Monaco, and then the
yeah.
British Grand Prix, and then Spa. They brought like kind of a further kind of tweak to the bumps. So I
Ah, okay.
think
So
it
Spa
started in
was
Monaco.
the yeah three
So
side pods, right?
yes,
Didn't we say
we're
three side pods?
we did, and so that makes it 5 total for this season.
Is that five? Okay, yeah. I've never
Because
been very
they
good at
started
math.
with the
Very good
zero
at
pot.
physics.
I can't do math unless there's numbers and unknown variables in it. Um, so it would have been they started the season with the high pod, then they went to the zero point 0.5 pod as the launch spec, then they went to like the wide pod, and then they've done
Mhm.
2 more iterations of the wide pod. So they're at 5 side pods then. Yeah. So
Yeah.
they're really going through it with side pod iterations here, which I
They
think
have as many side pods as Ferrari has rear wings.
I thought you were about to say power units.
No, oh, I wouldn't dare. The Mercedes fans would
I'll
be
say
in
it
my
then. They have as
comments.
many side pods as Ferrari does power units. I'm the power unit one
Oh
here,
yeah,
so I can
yes,
say it.
yes. You can say it. You know. Speaking of
Oh
power
my god.
units, though,
Oh no.
speaking of power units, I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were about the kind of the relative strengths of the powertrains on the grid, because I think
Okay.
generally, there was a feeling for, hey, we're not afraid to be wrong about things. I think
Oh
people can
god, no.
probably already, yeah, people can already pick up on this. We like to have
Yeah.
these conversations, but generally speaking, what are your thoughts about kind of like what's the pecking order as far as powertrains on the grid? There was some discussions about maybe Mercedes lacking in pace. Maybe it was just a
Yep.
drag issue, possibly. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
So my like definitive and like I'll gladly own this. I'm gonna do like that whole vine where it's like you look at me and tell me that I'm wrong. Am I wrong? Like I'm fine with having further discussions about this, but I really
Yeah.
think, and based on what we've seen and data, Ferrari is like the fastest, most power. However, it is unreliable. It's that whole do you build a fast but
Hmm.
unreliable machine or a machine that's not as fast but
Yeah.
extremely reliable? So I think that Ferrari is like top of the pecking order regardless. They have the most power, they're just very unreliable, and I think they're working through some of that issues, but I think that their cars are really inefficient, so we don't often get to see the full strength. And I think we know that from last season as well when they did detune for whatever reason. This really is the most powerful unit on the grid. I think we can see that in telemetry as well.
Hmm.
Next, I'm trying to run down through this. I think bottom of the barrel is for sure Alpine, but I think kind of the bottom rung of manufacturers is pretty close. And I think we know this not only from the data of the cars. I mean, they're struggling with their cars for other reasons, but the recent news about like kind of trying to balance the field a little bit
That's right.
more. They're
Yeah.
down, I think, 30 to 50 horsepower on the rest of the field, and even then, the rest of the field is still down on Ferrari. in terms of horsepower.
Yeah.
So I think that they're probably the worst, and they've been the worst for a while. Alpine, I'm really sorry, but that's just how it is. I think kind of in close to that, I would say we've got probably, I would say Red Bull would be next. We know this. We've seen this in the data that they are not the fastest on the grid. I've said this in other locations as well. In combination with their low drag on their car, it winds up looking a lot faster because it's the whole system. They might not have the fastest power, but that's not what it's about in Formula One. It's really about the whole system with your drag, your downforce levels, how everything is working together. So their really low drag and optimized aero of the car really make that power unit look a lot faster than it is, because it's never really been about your peak torque, your peak power. It's really the combination, like I'm saying. And so they look a lot faster than they are. But if you go and look at the raw data, they don't really have, in my opinion, one of the stronger power units on the grid. I think that they are still definitely leaps and bounds ahead of Alpine, but they're still not up there with like what Ferrari can do. And then I still really think Mercedes has the next best one on the grid. Under Ferrari, I do think what you were saying with kind of having really draggy and inefficient cars wasn't allowing them to really show what they're capable of. They've always had kind of a not as fast but incredibly reliable power unit, and when it's in the right system and everything is balanced, it's very fast, just like the Red Bull, like I was saying, where if it doesn't have to be the fastest, but in combination with the system, it can be fast. And so I think with what we saw with Aston Martin coming out of the gate this season was a true testament to that power unit speed that's also gearboxed by them as well. And now the Mercedes kind of figuring their issues out. Hey, they're back up there. And then also with McLaren, they're also giving Ferrari run for their money or outdoing Ferrari. And so I think that when you look at Renault, Honda, Mercedes, and Ferrari, your four suppliers right now, like that's kind of the pecking order. It's Ferrari, Mercedes, Honda, Renault are like my order, and there's not five. I'm like second guessing this for some reason. I'm like, am I forgetting
Alpine,
somebody? But I am not forgetting. But it's Renault.
No,
I'm thinking Alpine, but it's still Renault. So I think that's kind of my pecking order based on what we've seen so far, not only with the freeze coming in last season, but kind of where we stand at halfway.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I think you're spot on with that. I'm glad you brought up the whole package, because recently Fred Vasseur is on record about talking about, for instance, like the Red Bull, and there's been this whole, gosh, it makes me start to squirm when I see people posting about triple DRSs and all these like magical things. And when I talk to
like roll my eyes and close X
on different, yeah. I know, and it's so bad. But hey, it gets clicks.
Oh my God.
But
Oh my God,
when I talk to different aerodynamicists, we laugh about it. But I think at the end of the day, Fred Vasseur made a really good point. What he said was, look, the Red Bull car is just, it's not incredible in any single one thing. It's exactly what you said there, Molly. It's just really good at all the little small things that all sort of add up. And on top of that, you also look at like their pit stop performances. They haven't had any reliability issues like they had at the start of last year. So I think generally speaking, it's probably the most
they've had drive
well-rounded
shaft
car.
issues. They are having some torque delivery issues, I would say.
At the start of the year, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there still is some complaints with shifts and gear sinks and then drive shafts, but it's not power unit. It's not control electronics. It's not things going boom like we have had in other not as reliable power units, Ferrari. But they've had some stuff that's more on like the torque delivery side rather than
that's right.
What we've seen from some of the other cars.
Yeah, and interestingly, some of the things we've seen from some of the other cars, I think at different tracks have been more brake temp management. I think it was in Canada, there was potentially some issues with brake temp management that were going on with the Mercedes, right? I think maybe it was the McLaren in a different race as well that maybe was having some brake. There's been a lot of lift and coast that's been going on by different teams. So that's kind of surprising. So,
Yeah, and we've been seeing, I think, an increasing complexity of brake duct, winglets, and air direction to keep things not only a vortex generated across the rear and those components in like rear brakes, but I think we're seeing an increased complexity around just the brakes in general to try and manage what's not spec, but try to
Yeah.
manage the spec component the best they can.
Yeah, and inside the cake tin of the Aston Martin, you see all those little winglets that they have, kind of those
Yeah.
cascading winglets. It's almost like a multi-element wing they've put on the inside, in between the
Yeah.
cake tin
We
and sort of the outer cooling drum or whatever you want to
I
call it. But
yeah,
they're
I
they're
think it was
basically
last
deflecting
season
the
or
air. Yeah.
yeah, this season McLaren or last season McLaren on the rear, they have those like overlapped kind of ones as well between the cake tin and the shaft and the
Yeah.
duct as well. So I think that's I think
Yeah.
a bigger story in like kind of that sense than some of the other stuff. I think managing that's a big one.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, it's been a good first half of the season, and the second
It
half of the
has.
season is coming. Um, what are, maybe some things that we might be able to expect, or at least what are some things you might be looking for the second half of the season?
Second half of the season, I definitely am really curious to see if we see any further big like iterations, if we do see overhauls of anything else or things that the teams will start to try for 2024, which I think we're going to talk about, but I think we do know some teams have already pivoted. So are there going to be some things
Yeah.
teams bring in free practices as the season kind of goes that they're going to want to try, but I think do we see anybody who has, I guess, kind of saved their cadence of upgrades or has pushed their cadence of upgrades into the second half of the season, which I don't really know if
Mhm.
anybody has. I think a lot of teams have front loaded that. I think it'll be maybe more pieces here and there, but I am really curious to see if somebody does bring like a whole system, like something big, like what McLaren did, like what Mercedes did, if there's anything else big coming, at least personally. And then I'm also really excited. I don't think we've seen Monza specs. I'm excited for low downforce specs at Monza if we haven't seen them
Yeah.
yet. So I'm really interested in that.
They're coming.
Who's gonna win that war? Yeah, I'm really excited. That's always one of my favorite races to see what teams bring. I
Yeah.
think that'll be a really good show of power units and all of that as well. But I think that's kind of where I'm looking is I'm really curious to see how the development cadence has played out, because did you come too hot too fast out of the gate, or did you kind of play it right that you're able to keep up with your competition as they did their kind of cadence through the season?
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned about sort of, bringing upgrades or focusing on 2024
Mm-hmm.
is also going to be a really interesting thing to follow for some of the teams that might be looking for more substantial changes to their 2024
Yeah.
car. I think probably those teams are really going to not bring anything further, but really focus on 2024 because maybe the
Mm-hmm.
upgrades they might make on this car might not translate to 2024. So that
Yeah.
might be an indication for some of those teams that look, this particular team might actually be making a bigger step change next year.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep in mind cost as well. Who has cost in this year to be able to do some of that as well and to continue that late into the season with either late changes or stuff for next year? Like who has the budget that they could try something where they're like, we don't know if it's going to translate, but we want to try it anyway. Who has that
Yeah.
kind of in their budget available as well?
Yeah, yeah, and probably a good time, just to, because we are a tech podcast, just to explain to some of the listeners about 2023 upgrades feeding into 2024 upgrades and why, for
Mm-hmm.
instance,
Yeah.
some teams like Mercedes have said anything that we're doing that's upgrading the car this year could translate to 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is because, if you're not significantly changing the aerodynamic platform of the car, then basically the core fundamentals of the aero features on the car are going to be the same. So you might make minor
Mm-hmm.
modifications, minor changes here and there, but it's not changing, say, the overall aero structures all around the
Mm-hmm.
car significantly enough to where it doesn't translate to 2023, 2024.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But this is why I mentioned that, if somebody's going to come out with, say, a like for like Mercedes when they went from the no pod or the half pod to like the pod, the the fifth pod that they have
They
now.
have, yeah.
Um, with I mean, with that sort of a translation, if they planned something like that for 2024, it would be very difficult for them, I think, to make upgrades this year and then have them still
Mm-hmm.
translate. And I think one of the things that I'm expecting, so, I might be wrong, I'm not afraid to be wrong, but one of the things that I'm expecting is that they will get rid of the cis wing.
Yeah, I
Because
agree.
the side impact structure is integrated into this downwashing wing. And now that they have a side pod, it really doesn't make as much sense anymore. And so I think they're going to move away from that next year. They can't do that this year because it will change
No.
do you have to re-homologate the
Yes.
entire monocoque? Okay.
Yeah, you have to go. Which is so kind of like frustrating and crazy to me because they have to go back through and re-homologate the entire monocoque if they change the location of that and where it's integrated. There's a regulation box it has to fit in, and they're using it's a spec design of CIS. It comes from Red Bull Technologies, or the teams can build it, and it has to meet the following spec. It's all in the regulations. But my big like crux with this is there's no test in homologation for side impact. There is a
Yeah.
side intrusion test to make sure that your monocoque can withstand intrusions from the side. So, like, if anybody's familiar with what happened to James Hinchcliffe in IndyCar, where his suspension came through the tub and actually skewered him into the car, like they make sure that your tub, there's intrusion tests there, it doesn't puncture, and it's like a burst test, puncture, and all of that. There's no true side impact test to test your CIS and your SIPs, or
Mm.
whatever you want to call it. I call them SIPs, which is side impact protection structure. There's no true side impact test in homologation that tests that location and tests that that location within the regulation box is okay. So I don't really get why they have to go back through and rehomologate if they don't actually
Yeah.
do anything for it. But that's like kind of my whole crux of the issue there, which is
Yeah.
also mind-boggling that they don't do that. But
It
that's the
is.
whole thing. They'll
Yeah.
have to go back through and have it approved and rehomologated.
Mhm.
Homologation's not cheap. Homologation is time intensive as well. So between time and money, they likely couldn't do it this year, so they're working around it.
That's right. And for some of our
But
listeners that
yep.
might not know, there is a front impact that is part of the tests that need to be done as part of the
Yes.
homologation. I believe there's also a rear impact as well for the rear
Yes,
impact
front and
structure.
rear there are.
Yeah, but no side impact, as you mentioned, which is really
No.
scary because,
And
I mean, yeah.
just the if you look at, and I hate to use this as so macabre, but if you look at the like I'm in like safety mode brain. If you look at the trends of significant injuries and deaths that have occurred in open wheel cars, it is a side impact. And at least the most recent ones have been. And so it's just mind boggling that your last occurrences or your occurrences have this trend and there's still nothing for it. Maybe there's something coming, maybe they're looking into it, but the fact that there is nothing for it, considering the history with side impact we've had so far, is shocking. There is front, there's rear,
Yeah.
and there's intrusion tests, but there is not a true side impact test.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think it is very shocking. So,
Mm-hmm.
speaking of the second half of the season, there's been some discussions about DRS.
My favorite.
Lots of people talking about, potentially removing DRS from qualifying, for instance. There's still continues to be conversations about, do we need DRS at all? Do we need to move to some kind of like a push to pass sort of a thing now? What are your thoughts
Yeah.
on this whole thing?
So I think we do still need DRS with this current gen car until we have a better handle on the dirty air. I think we've talked about this in other forums where they've improved the dirty air, but there is still a downforce loss on a trailing car because of their proximity to the wake that's still created. Because it does kick it up and out of the way. It does that in a quicker fashion than the previous generation, but there's still wake and still downforce loss across a trailing car that they're still struggling with. And so I think they need DRS still in some capacity until there is a better handle on that. And I think the series is kind of leaving that up to the teams, which is really frustrating to see because NASCAR's having the same exact problem with a ground effect car right now. And the series is testing underwings and different diffuser combinations. And they're actively testing and working with the teams to try and find a way to improve that downforce loss and that wake kick out so the trailing cars don't have that problem, which is really cool to see play out, and they're being very transparent about it. But it's like the same problem that Formula One is having. And I think until they correct that or find a better way to manage that, I think they still need it. I am 100% on team make it like push to pass. I love push to pass, the strategic elements that it has in IndyCar. I have said this on my platform. I've said this to other people. I've said this on other podcasts. Make DRS like push to pass, which is a limited number of presses and when you use it and duration per race. So like IndyCar is 150 seconds of it. You get it in 5-second spurts, and you can stay on that button as long as you want or not as you want. And so you can have some at the end. You can use it all in the front and then maintain good track position. You can use it on a lap to really push and try and build a gap if you're trying to pit and not lose positions and get undercut. So I think that there's a really good strategic element to push to pass that I would love to see come into play with DRS. But I don't know what you think about that compared to how like my stance is.
I'm with you there, Molly. I am also on the push to pass train, the hype train. I think that would be a good addition, you know, in a way to use that. But I think also, like, I was watching British Touring Car Championship, you know, being here in the UK, and they handicap they call it hybrid. They handicap their hybrid duration. So what they do is that if you're lower in the constructor standings, you get more during the race, and if you're higher in the constructor standings, you get less. So they handicap the amount that you get, which is one way to sort of maybe pull the pack up a bit closer. So that's an interesting element as well. You know, could you do something like that as well with sort of this push past
it's
that
interesting to
PRS?
think about it that way too. I kind of really like that, because you have people that are like, oh, reverse the grid, do all this stuff. Like that could actually be a way to do it, just like the sliding scale of wind tunnel time and aero testing and CFD time. Like let the scale slide of push to pass, which would actually be really interesting to think about with the gaps that we see, especially through the midfield, with the midfield being so tight now. And then you have the big jump to the top three. Like that would be very interesting to think about. How would that help pull the field up even closer too? I didn't even think about the BTCC option, which is British Touring Car, for anybody unaware. So that's actually a good thought as well. I mean, I'm a big sports car girl, and a lot of people are going to hate me saying it. I'm a big bop girl. Like it gets political, and I don't think the landscape for Formula One is correct for bop. I think that could be a similar approach. It's coming with the 2026 power unit regulations. If you're lower than 3%, they'll make adjustments, you get extra time, all that good stuff. But and they're kind of talking about this engine rebalance too, where there might actually be some bopping potentially, or ways to speed up and slow other engines down to try and rebalance things. But I don't think the landscape is right for something like that, where you could use how well you're doing in the races as a way to determine your DRS or your hybrid output with like power to weight ratio. So I think there's some sort of combination between, I think, like constructors championship finish order. I really like that, and then the push to pass type of system that I think would work well. It's definitely not like a one size fits all solution, but I think that there are things out there that they can look at and leverage that would actually work much more successfully than the current system.
And I guess my only issue with the bop sort of a thing is that it's just sort of like dragging an anchor for the whole race versus like where you're using like a handicap kind of push to pass. Like you said, it does become more strategic, because so it does allow for maybe some more exciting race strategy, which speaking of, we have Zandvoort coming up this weekend,
So
and
excited.
last year, hey, how about that segue? And last year
it was
the race,
perfect.
that was a good one, wasn't it? And last year the race in Zandvoort was actually had a lot of strategy to it. You know, I mean, George Russell ended up P2 in the W13, which is saying something. But a lot of it was done on strategy to get in there, right? So, I think this is another race where we could be seeing a lot of strategic things.
I agree.
You know, during qualifying, I think it was that there was 0.021 seconds between Leclerc and Max Verstappen.
Yes, it was
During
close or
qualifying
something like that.
it was very close, And I think there was 3/10 between the top four as well. So that
Yes.
Zandvoort
I
only
remember
has
it
one
being very
DRS
close.
zone.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I think it's
I
going to be a
think
very
that's. Go
interesting
ahead, sorry.
race. Yeah.
We're both just so excited about Zandvoort. We're like, yes, oh my gosh,
We
Zandvoort,
are.
let's talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Oh my
you
gosh,
go.
yeah,
Take over, Molly.
I think last year, and especially that one DRS one, I think this year, because we see such a efficiency difference in all of the cars, I think the lack of DRS at this track is going to make for some really exciting quality. And I'm actually very excited with
Yeah.
how we have seen some folks kind of surprise us and show up in the field, and how close the field has been in some of the rounds of quali, where it's like we have zero point 0.1 seconds between P5 and P20 or something like crazy like we've had. So I think that
Hmm.
not only your strategy for qualifying, your track placement when you go out, your tire selection, and the track evolution there is going to be really key. But I think like in the race, it's going to be even more key, because last year proved that it was really all about strategy in that race and how you kind of played out around your competition, because it is a track position track. It has some good areas for passing, but I think still with this current gen car, it's really all about track position and how you are undercutting, overcutting, managing tires, and being agile. I think in your strategy is really key here too, because if your competition does something else, are you sticking to your guns, or are you going to pivot and cover, or do you feel like you have an agile strategy here to kind of change as you go on the fly to kind of accommodate what's happening around you?
Absolutely. And I think the softest tire that Pirelli's going to be running is the new kind of intermediate tire that was sort of in
Yeah.
between the softest last year and the medium last year. So it's sort of a
Yeah.
new, it's kind of a new landscape for the teams as well to sort out kind
Yes.
of how the softest tire is going to run. But I am looking to see
Yeah.
if Ferrari indeed have solved their tire degradation issues in Spa. They had very good signs. They had great
Yeah,
tire
they did.
degradation. So maybe they found something there. Let's see if it translates to Zandvoort.
I know. Speaking of like
You
new
get your
tires at
fingers crossed.
racetracks, I know I have everything crossed that like we can see. You don't get free feed on this podcast. I'm sorry. Um,
Yeah, sorry. That's not that kind of show.
no, it is not. I was gonna say, speaking of tires and new tires at racetracks, IndyCar for the first time this weekend is bringing an alternate tire to the ovals, whereas like ovals you have your one and you go for it. There's the oval tire, but now there's this new alternate rule coming, and you have to use both for a minimum of 2 laps. And so I think this race is going to really become who saves their alternates for the end, because we know that those are going to be your sticky quick tires, especially
Yeah.
in, oh, it's not a night race this year. Usually this is a night race. It's a day race now. So there's not the whole
Mm,
cooling track situation either. So I think it's going
yeah.
to be really, really interesting to see what they do on their short oval at WWT Raceway this coming race as well. Side note, random, we're talking about tire compounds, and it popped into my brain. So that'll be one to watch too if you're into that as well.
And that's perfect because, we do have some IndyCar content that will be coming in future
Yes.
episodes, and are
Mm-hmm.
you going to be spending any time at any races soon, Molly, or?
So I just got back from the Nashville GP, which is the Music City Grand Prix. I have a ton of content that I filmed and did not post. And then I was peer pressured into the NASCAR IndyCar doubleheader by some friends in the IndyCar paddock. And so I drove down to Indianapolis and did that as well. I was there on some content filming too. I was more so there as a fan, but I did film some stuff as well. And I've been, like, full disclosure, struggling with creator burnout, where like filmed it, edited it, sits in my draft, and I'm like, I hate that. What does it add to the conversation? So I do have some stuff, and then I'm also maybe going to Laguna Seca. I'm talking with a couple people,
Ooh,
and I might get to go to the championship, or might go. So if that plays out, I will be there. So I will do
that would
some
be
stuff there
great.
as well. But I do have some stuff sitting in drafts that will be coming from the races that I was just at.
Very cool. So yeah, definitely. I know we've talked some F1 on this particular episode. We will have more cross motorsport content that will be coming,
Yes.
but I think yeah, it's been a good discussion of F1 season so far and what we might expect in the next race, but
Hmm.
as well as the second half of the season. And I think we're going
Yeah.
to pivot now to a tech bias segment. So our tech bias
Yes.
segment is a segment where Molly and I each get our chance to stand on our tech platform and talk about something that really interests us. And I know, Molly, you're totally geeking about your tech topic today. Do you want to tell
Yes.
us all about it?
Yes, aka this is the session where you see Dr. Obbs and I be giant nerds about something in the world of motorsports, as if we weren't already on main. So yeah, I was going to cover on my tech bias segment actually the use of AI in racing, and I've talked about this in a lot of other places, but I got tagged in some tweets recently about are F1 teams using AI in any capacity, and is there AI use happening in the Formula One paddock? And while we don't have confirmation of it exclusively, there is some stuff out there. I wanted to talk about kind of two really key pieces of AI happening in motorsports right now. So the first one is one that has been making the rounds for a little while now. It's called Pit Row, RHO, like the Greek symbol. And they were recently acquired by General Motors, actually. And what they are is a machine learning platform that was originally designed to help, like, with Vegas odds. But what it's now become is a strategy calling machine in NASCAR. And what it does is in NASCAR, all of the team's telemetry is available. It's called SMT data to all of the teams in real time. And so what Chevrolet was doing when they partnered with Pit Row originally is they were feeding in not only their car's data, but the entire field's data. And then that virtual machine runs the game or the race over and over and over and over and over again to find the optimal strategy to win you the race. So in NASCAR, when you pit, you can change 4 tires, add fuel, 2 tires, add fuel, no tires, fuel only, tires, no fuel. There's a bunch of combinations of things that you can do in a NASCAR pit stop. And so what this model did is it would run your competition's data against yours, run your pit stop information and over again and tell you how to win the race. So it would be like pit, lap 83, take fuel only. Or it would tell you pit, here, take 4 tires and fuel. And it's like the optimal result. And so there are actually like race wins that have come from calling the model. Ryan Newman ran a race in 2017. Austin Dillon won a shock race with it. And so it's validated the model. And it's continued to be used by Chevrolet, and it's kind of left Toyota and Ford to build their own tools and catch up. And now this tool has been acquired by General Motors for use across all of their racing series. They acquired it, I believe, last year. And so they said in this release that their intention was to use it across everything that GM races in. And so they're using this AI tool to call NASCAR strategy, and it's proven. So you could look to see it coming to things like WEC, IMSA, and IndyCar because those are the other 3 series that General Motors is in. Now, for Formula One, there is something out there that I'm aware of with a company called Quantum Black. They are an arm of McKinsey and Company, and they are an AI kind of like consulting service. And what I know that they're doing in the Formula One space is digital twinning, if you're familiar with that. And so that's where you have like a full on digital twin of your car. And what Quantum Black does is has the digital twin actually race the car on track because you have all of your telemetry and all of your output, and you'll have the twin racing the actual like car data, and the twin will run and put out optimal setups, optimal different things with what you're currently doing to make the twin either the same or better than your car. So you'll wind up where the twin could be beating the on-track version, and it is right down identical to the car. They used it
Mhm.
in, I want to say, America's Cup with Team New Zealand to test hydrofoil designs. And they were able to cut down on testing and analysis costs and time by 95% with using this model. And it basically output by having the actual like data from the racing boat and the digital twin run at the same time and race each other. They were able to put out all of these different setup options and what were the actual best combinations for that hydrofoil. So they can do all of these different things and let the digital twin run against the actual on-track car, or put the twin into the simulator, which is what Quantum Black has been doing in Formula One, is they'll put the twin in the sim and let the twin run in the simulator and get some data back out as well. You can kind of plug it in right then and there rather than changing something on the car on track. We'll go change the twin with some code, and maybe like a piece of math or a model, and let
Hmm.
it run and see what happens, and let it race against the car on track to see its improvement, or just let it run through its iterations and its models and see what it outputs for us as well. So I'm aware of that out there. And then pit row, I'm actually really curious to see if we are going to get like a pit row in Formula One. I think it's really smart. I think that it's a matter of time before we get a strategy AI into Formula One. I think we're seeing a lot of OEMs, a lot of companies, a lot of teams realize that they need to be like a software powerhouse as well, not only just a like development and design powerhouse if they want to have this kind of stuff in house. It's out there, but not all of it's available. You have to kind of develop it yourself. So I think we may see that pivot happen. I don't know, but there's some cool stuff out there. So Quantum Black, you can Google it. It's out there. Pit Row. We can link. We'll put links out. I think for both of us. There's a good article on both of the Pit
Yeah.
Row and Quantum Black to kind of for our listeners to dig into a little more. But it's cool. It's coming. I think it's just a matter of time before we see more. I think teams and more cars utilizing it.
Yeah, and that's a great overview, Molly. I think people have probably heard about a lot of the work that happens off track in between
Yeah.
sessions, and a lot of this is sort of running through these twins, as you mentioned, and really helps you to
Mm-hmm.
get to the track with a good setup. And
Mm-hmm.
but the strategy element of it, I think, is really cool and something that I'm looking
I do
forward to
too.
making its way into Formula One.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm really excited as well.
cool.
So when you pit, how you pit, what tire you take. I think the multiple tire compounds is going to be a cool layer for an AI like that, especially because NASCAR, there's only one compound, and then your wet tires. Like you don't get a choice. So it's just fresh tires, wet tires,
Yeah.
or you don't take any tires. So I think the multiple compounds will be a cool thing to see with a model like that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Great tech buy segment, Molly. So my tech buy
Thank
segment,
you.
of course, is in my wheelhouse a little bit for aerodynamic topics. So we've been
Yay.
seeing a lot of teams have been modifying their rear wings as of late. I think
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember where it was. Maybe it was Hungary. We started seeing more teams cutting sections of the rear wing end plates out. We saw it
Yeah.
last year. Aston Martin went the other direction. They added the whole armchair
With the couch. Yeah.
rear wing, right? Yeah, the couch arm. Yeah, exactly. To reduce the amount of spillover that they had to increase the
Mm-hmm.
amount of downforce they had from especially the first element. But we're seeing a lot more teams now cutting back the second element on the end plate. It's within the regulations. It's allowed.
Yep.
We should talk about why the end plates are like that. Formula One's
Mm-hmm.
really trying to limit the amount of, like we talked about, the dirty wake that's coming off the backside of the car, and they're allowing for some of the spillover to happen, so they actually get this sort of mushroom-like upwash effect, which is one of the main things that's carrying the wake up and over the following car
Yeah.
behind it. But what teams are starting to do is they're starting to sort of cut back in this end plate a bit. And I believe, and I've talked to a few people that would probably know more than me, but and they've also confirmed that their feeling is that, teams are mainly looking to reduce drag by doing this,
Mm-hmm.
especially teams that
Yeah.
have an issue where they want to be able to generate some rear load so they have some rear balance,
Mm-hmm.
but they also want to be able to
Yeah.
shed drag at high speeds. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
ways to do that is to reduce the amount of induced drag that you have at high speed. And the induced drag is where
Okay.
you
Yeah.
have then this spillage, kind of this spillover.
Mm-hmm.
So the underside of the wing is the suction side, the top side of the rear wing is the pressure side. And so naturally, air always wants to move from high energy to low energy, so it spills from the
Yep.
top to the bottom. And by doing this, the teams are allowing some of this flow to move around past this cutout, which is reducing the rear load a bit, but it's only reducing it mostly at high speeds, and it's reducing the induced drag as well. So I think
Mm-hmm.
they wouldn't be doing it if there wasn't a net gain. So there must be a net
Yeah.
gain, and I think that this net gain is primarily for them in the form of induced drag, especially at high speeds. There may
Mm-hmm.
be a DRS element to it as well, that it might also be playing up with
Yeah.
some of kind of the DRS effectiveness, possibly. I haven't dug too much into it, but I think this is an area that as the last half of the year is progressing and into next year, I'm going to be looking and seeing what teams are doing around there. So yeah,
Yeah, I'm like, you see me over here playing right hand rule. I think that that could be
yeah,
something worth looking into, and maybe we just cracked something open on the pod.
yeah,
That maybe there is a inherent DRS benefit too there, because that ties back into that ratio of downforce to drag and that load to drag ratio. And I actually would be,
yeah.
we know that downforce, the D is stands for drag. And so I actually would be very curious to see, and maybe this is something we go play in the data, and I'm sorry if I'm giving anybody this idea for free. We go look at DRS peak speeds or DRS times with a wing that is cut versus non-cut and non-trimmed that has that end, and
Yeah.
see if there's a difference we see there on the DRS. I know like we can't approximate downforce without CFD and all of that good stuff. I wish we could, but maybe there's
That's right.
something in the telemetry between a wing that's cut out and not cut out in that area.
Yeah, because we know that, I mean, one of the reasons, there is no magic to Red Bull's DRS.
No.
It really is just that they're able to run a more loaded wing than others because they are so much more
Mm-hmm.
aerodynamically efficient,
Yep.
which means that now,
Exactly.
of course, when they have a bigger, you know, rear wing, then the DRS effect is going to be higher. So that's really just the
Mm-hmm.
extent of it. Um, but
Yeah.
aside from that, there could be something to this. So yeah, I'm definitely going to dig into this a little bit more and see see if there's something out there.
Yeah, no. Keep me posted, keep us posted on your findings. I'm very curious about that
Absolutely.
as well, as what might be lurking in the data, because that it actually is a really good thought about DRS effects of that too, with the if they're trying to reduce rear drag and then you're also reducing drag with DRS, is that, I don't want to say like
Mhm.
call it like double DRS or triple DRS, but that could improve your efficiency maybe, or
They could
improve
be working
the
together,
overall.
right? Yeah.
Yes, like hand in hand improve the effectiveness of your DRS, because we see DRS efficacy being very important, obviously.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So those were two. Those were our tech buy segments for episode one.
Yes.
Those were really good ones. We'll definitely be placing some links
Those
for
are fun.
anybody that wants to know more about Quantum
Yes.
Black and some of the other things that you talked about there, Molly. But this has been a good first episode. I
Yeah.
think there's much more to come from us. Hopefully
Hmm.
our listeners are looking forward to it. I know we're looking forward to producing more
Yeah.
content. And any closing thoughts from you, Molly, before we sign off our first episode?
No. I think obviously welcome to Breaking Bias, and we've got lots of fun
Yes.
stuff coming and lots of exciting content that we're both excited about with this platform. And much like the F1 season is back with a bang, we're off with a bang, and we're excited to be here and excited to kick this off and get it going.
That's right. And if you're not following us on Twitter, we are at Breaking Bias Pod. You can follow us on Twitter. We will be on YouTube, I'm sure, by the time this gets published
Yes.
at some point. We will be on YouTube creating some content as well. So, Molly, it's
Yes.
been a
Under
great
the
first
same name
episode.
there.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a great first episode. Really looking forward to more, and hopefully everybody comes back for episode two in the future.
Yeah. See you later.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.